also the best strategies to improve diversity in the intensive care unit. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to introduce our next speaker, Joana Berger from Bern, Switzerland. And she will be talking about equality and diversity in medicine and some of the challenges we have and how we can overcome it.
So the male unless otherwise indicated concept, or seeing men as human default, is unfortunately an old habit deeply rooted in the history of mankind. Cave paintings, for example, are often of game animals, and so researchers have assumed that they were done by men or the hunters who have hunted these animals. Curiously, newer analyses of handprints that appear alongside these paintings have suggested that, in fact, the majority of them were actually done by women. The extent to which the male unless otherwise indicated term permeates our thinking may seem even less surprising when you realize that it is embedded in our daily language. The word man, like doctor, lawyer, researcher, or surgeon, are commonly used in an ambiguous way that is impossible to decide whether it refers to males or type of occupation in general. Research shows that when the generic masculine is used, people are more likely to recall famous men rather than famous women, or to estimate a profession as male-dominated. So it all starts not in medicine, but in society in general, where, putting it in a rather defiant way, diversity occurs as a deviation from the male default. Well, bias is prevalent in every aspect of our lives, so our brains are hardwired to categorize things we encounter in order to make sense of the complicated world around us. However, biases can cause us to form prejudices against others, which allows for inequalities to form between different demographics. And this has obvious consequences for the workplace environment. Some significant statistics include 42% of women experiencing gender discrimination at work, both men and women being twice as likely to hire a male candidate, 1/3 of men and women believing that males are better at risk management, and 4% of CEO roles only being held by women of color, for example. These statistics reflect the so-called leaky pipeline, a metaphor for the way that women slowly disappear as one looks into particular career ladders. The leaky pipeline is also very important in medicine. Although women make up more than 50% of physicians in training and 78% of the entire health workforce, they comprise only 1/3 of the physician workforce in medicine. Women are also less likely to be promoted to faculty positions, they obtain less funding for research, and they hold fewer positions of leadership in medical societies and departments. This is all being more or less addressed by the two previous speakers. Importantly, they also progress through pay grades more slowly than men and are paid less. Some specialties are even less populated by females, and sadly, the gender disparity in medicine exists in several forms, through career progression, academic advancement, leadership roles, and remuneration, which leads invariably to a positive bias towards men. This positive bias is also observed in hiring, reviewing national grants, selection of leaders for large research centers, publication in prestigious medical journals, and speaking in conferences. Gender inequality at work is due to a variety of factors. I won't be able to address them all here, but there are some interesting theories worth mentioning. A plausible theory to explain the gender pay gap, for example, is the so-called pollution theory, which might also be extrapolated to understand why certain professions are underrepresented by a particular sex. This theory suggests that jobs which are dominated by women offer lower wages because of the presence of women within this occupation. As women enter an occupation, this reduces the amount of prestige associated with the job, and then men subsequently leave. Gender bias is also a significant cause of persistent gender gap. Therefore, it is important to detect the elements of discrimination. For example, this could relate to unconscious bias, that women with families have less experience than men because they have taken time out of work and they are therefore less qualified to be on a decision body. This is also called the motherhood penalty. Other obstacles in careers and academics stemming from females' experiences of inequality are called the so-called imposter syndrome, Women tend to underappreciate their capacity and achievements, and as a consequence, they're less likely than men to promote themselves, to apply for a job, to ask for a promotion, unless they meet all the necessary criteria. And yet, women's traits, such as being more intuitive, more empathic, more attentive to detail, or even a better listener, may contribute to superior patient outcomes. This is very elegantly depicted on the paper cited at the bottom of this slide. So, what does the evidence show? Are women really that difficult? Are men really better? Well, actually, it's not. It's not. That's not the case. Gender diversity in decision making and participation in the workforce results in stronger economies, more productive institutions, and a more stable governance. Gender parity also maximizes academic productivity, and peer-reviewed publications with gender diverse authorships receive more citations and therefore are more popular than publications produced by single gender authorship teams. Moreover, it has been shown that gender diverse groups collaborate more effectively and exhibit higher collective intelligence. So, what is it that we can do? Redressing the current gender gap in medicine will improve working conditions for all physicians and will contribute to a more stable workforce. But unfortunately, there is no magic pill, and research is lacking regarding effective strategies to reduce discrimination. However, I do believe that there are three main aspects worth mentioning. First of all, we need to increase the overall awareness of the gender gap topic. Second, we need to identify factors that discourage women and ethnic minorities to progress on their careers. And third, we need to tackle these issues very objectively, almost goal-oriented, in a gender-neutral and non-discriminative fashion. I will discuss some examples in the following slides. So first of all, zero tolerance to discrimination. Well, gender bias is very difficult to eliminate, in part because of the historical late entry of women into higher education and research. So probably the most important step that we can take, and in some instances also the most difficult, is to have zero tolerance for discrimination. The high proportion of women who report having been mistreated at work is very alarming. Such forms of conduct have a negative effect on the self and on the team and hamper career progression. So all healthcare institutions must have some sort of zero tolerance approach to discrimination. This includes issuing guidelines, enforcing accountability with clear consequences for inappropriate behavior. Furthermore, gender neutrality must be practiced by avoiding words and language that can reinforce gender stereotypes. To minimize the impact of gender bias on leadership appointments, formal selection processes and transparent processes should be used. And this includes, for example, selection panels being blinded to gender whenever possible. For example, removing names from CVs in the initial selection process. That would be an idea. Another solution to overcome gender bias is to set gender-based targets or quotas for the promotion of women appointed to leadership positions or panels, or speaking at conferences, or even research funding. The World Economic Forum 2016 reports that setting targets for recruitment and retention of female employees is a crucial strategy to improve female representation across all industries. There is proportional representation, which is supported by many governments and universities like Victoria and Sheila already mentioned. However, quotas are controversial, as some argue that they undermine equality and discredit the women appointed to the designated female positions. And finally, welfare state policies incentivizing men to increase their participation in unpaid work, parental leave, or more time with family are also a way to neutralize gender imbalance. Raising awareness is an important concept. Regularly auditing and publishing data on female representation in medicine will increase the visibility of the gender imbalance, as the barriers that impede gender parity and leadership are deeply embedded in cultural norms. Reaching gender equity will require strengthening civil education, reinforcing the values of diversity and pluralism, and engaging all genders and generations. Commitment by men, particularly, to increase participation of women in leadership is fundamental. We know that there is limited existing data suggesting that discrimination is significantly worse in non-mainstream groups. And this is particularly even more significant when individual characteristics are intersectional. For example, if you are disabled and a person of color. As individuals, these minorities have limited power to confront diversity issues. So those in a position of power capable of decision making, who are unfortunately in their majority white men, need to be actively trained and involved on issues about discrimination. Another important aspect is supporting equity measures. The structural change in the workplace is crucial for women's integration and advancement in the workforce. This includes transparent parental leave schemes accessible to men and women, workplace flexibility through flexible work hours and part-time appointments, on-site childcare, and even at the workplace or even at conferences. Mentoring programs should be carefully tailored to support women, as men are more likely than women to receive strategic career advice and to be recommended for career opportunities as a result of mentoring relationships. And dedicated efforts should encourage talented women to apply for leadership roles, including positions on boards, committees, or speaker engagements. On the other hand, developing effective professional networks and advocating for key structural change must actively engage men in the change process. This is an interesting summary of a worldwide survey on gender disparities in anesthesia, where all different strategies to overcome inequality are proposed and grouped by individual, departmental, institutional, and societal strategies. I particularly like it because it's broad enough to serve people with different contexts, as some measures may not be adequate in certain backgrounds. So to summarize, I would leave you with a plan of action to deal with the gender equality as was already addressed before, and that can obviously be adapted to each individual context. So first of all, we should all increase overall awareness of the gender gap topic. Second, we should clearly identify the factors that discourage women and ethnic minorities to progress on their career or academic tracks. And third, we should tackle these issues very objectively, very goal-oriented in a gender-neutral and non-discriminative fashion. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. That's really, really insightful and helpful. I have a question for you, Joanna. I guess